So you found out that you have Welsh or English ancestors, and you're wondering what records are out there to research them. Or maybe you've already started researching those ancestors and you want to make sure you've covered all your bases. In this video, I'm going to go over my top 5 online record sets for genealogical research in Wales and England. These are the records that I'm constantly using in my research, and to show that, all of the images that you're about to see are about my distant ancestor, Eleanor Davis, and her family. If I miss any records that you think are really important, make sure to share them in the comments. Number 1. The census. Probably the most important record set that you'll use is the census. The census happened every 10 years, starting in 1841. The census years that are online include up to 1921. However, at the time of the making of this video, the 1921 census is still pay per page viewed, on top of your typical subscription. In the census, you'll find a lot of useful information, including current address, names, relationships between members of the household, any servants, laborers, boarders, or visitors in the home, marriage condition, age, occupation, place of birth, and disability. The census changed a bit over time, so later censuses will include information on language. The 1841 census is the most different, including only address, names, ages, occupations, and whether they were born in their current county. It doesn't even tell you how the people in the house were related. The 1931 census was destroyed, and there wasn't one taken in 1941 due to the war. Instead, the 1939 register was taken at the beginning of the war for a number of purposes, including for the issuing of ration cards. That 1939 register is online and will include the address, names, exact birth dates, marriage status, and occupation. For women who married after 1939, you'll often see that their birth surname is crossed out and replaced with their husband's surname, which can be really helpful for researching this period. No matter what information is included, it's vital that you find your ancestors in each census taken during their lifetime. Number 2. Tax records. Decades before the 1841 census, there was a survey of landowners and occupiers made to aid in tax collection. The 1798 UK land tax redemption was created alongside King George III's changes in how land taxes were levied. In these records, you'll find the name of the landowner and occupier, the amount of the tax paid, the parish, and in some places, you'll also get the name of the property. This record set is one of the few countrywide record sets that you'll find online that can help you to see who was living at a certain property around the turn of the century. Also done for tax purposes, the 1841 tithe records are a wealth of information. You can get a set of detailed maps of the parish, showing you the landscape, roads, buildings, and all the parcels of land. The maps are accompanied by the apportionment booklets that list the landowner, the land occupier, the name of the property, each parcel of land that belonged to each property, and the amount of the tithe charged. This record set is especially helpful as a supplement to the 1841 census, allowing you to see if your ancestors owned their property or who their landlord was. Number 3. Newspapers and journals. As I've mentioned in other videos, the National Library of Wales has millions of pages of newspaper and journal articles available online for free. These range from 1804 to 1919 for the newspapers, and then there are a few earlier and many more later articles in the journals. But these articles really start to shine, in my experience, in the mid-1800s up to 1919. For some earlier and many more recent newspapers, you can look at the Find My Past newspaper database. The newspapers and journals are great for turning your ancestors from a list of names and dates into real people. If they were a troublemaker, experienced some sort of scandal or tragedy, were locally prominent, ran a business, were wealthy, or for any number of reasons, you'll find your ancestors in the newspapers and journals. Number 4, wills and probate. The National Library of Wales wills are a staple of my pre-1800s research, because before you get to the census, documents that explicitly state who our ancestors' relatives were are harder to come by. The Welsh wills run from 1500 to 1858, though I found them most helpful in the period from 1750 to 1858. Sometimes Welsh wills were proved through the Prerogative Court of Canterbury. You can find wills from 1384 to 1858 online for free through the UK National Archives website. The Welsh wills that were proved through this court were of people who owned land in England, died outside of Wales or England, or sometimes if they were a nonconformist. Wills list all of a person's wealth, their land, their leases, their livestock, their investments, who they were indebted to and who were indebted to them. And because a will is about dividing that wealth up among their heirs, they will name their family members and friends, which can help us build out a family tree and confirm relationships. After 1858, the record keeping changed for wills, and you'll find instead the probate index for all wills proved all of the way up to 1995. The index is a short summary of basic information found in the will, but will often include names, the date of death, an address, and the name of the executor, and sometimes how they're related. To be able to see the will in full, you'll have to buy a copy from the General Register Office. Number 5, the Parish Register. The Parish Register kept track of baptisms, marriages, and burials done through the local parish church. These records can run from the late 17th century to the first half of the 20th century. However, you're most likely to find records for 1813 till around 1900. Before 1813, the parish record wasn't standardized, so you'll get different kinds of information based on your location. If you're lucky, you might find some names, places, and dates, and you might also get notes about relatives, properties, or even gossip. In the post-1813 baptisms, you'll find the baptism date, names, address, and the father's occupation. For parish marriages between 1813 and 1836, you'll see names, marriage date, and witnesses, and after 1836, you'll get even more information, including addresses, fathers' names, and occupations. For parish burials, you'll get a name, address, burial date and place, and then the age. Sometimes these important events weren't registered through the local parish church, but instead were done through civil registration, starting in 1837. In the case of these records, you have to buy them through the General Register Office. But sometimes these records will hold the last piece of information that you need to make everything make sense. There are some caveats that I'm going to quickly point out now that will impact what records will be available for you to do your research with. The first one is time. As we can see from our timeline of records, to really get at the bulk of the records, you need to get to the early 1900s or even to the late 1800s. I'm 30 years old right now, and for me, that means knowing who my great and my great-great-grandparents were. I was lucky because my grampy knew his parents and his grandparents and spoke about them a lot. If you don't have access to this kind of information, it can be a bit trickier. The second one is religion. The history of religion in Wales and England makes a big difference in how your ancestors show up in these records. I've already done 2 videos on religious nonconformity that go into detail on this topic, so go check them out later if you're interested. Number 3 is location. The availability of these records always depends on the parish that you're looking at. Some places will have parish registers surviving from 1695. Others only have records from 1813 onwards. Some parishes will have a whole census year missing from the online databases. Booklets get lost, they get damaged, and we need to consider ways to get around that. Number 4 is social class. Social class is so important to consider. If your ancestor didn't own any land or rent a large piece of land, then they won't appear in the UK land redemption or the tithe records. If they didn't have a lot of wealth, they likely won't have written a will pre-1858. Again, the key is to work around these gaps. They may be mentioned in someone else's will, or if they were a domestic servant, maybe their employer had bequeathed them something in their will. So keep looking even if you're not sure that a record set will be directly relevant to your family. And then there's other characteristics. If your ancestors were in a workhouse, placed in an asylum, if they bred livestock, if they witnessed or were charged for a crime, or any other number of things, there will be records that document all that. So do your best to learn as much as possible about who your ancestors were, and then look for the records that talk about those things. And here's a bonus one. I know there's a lot of interest in medieval Welsh connections. I don't do work in that time period, but for those of you descended from noble houses, there's a lot of sources for Welsh pedigrees that run from the mid-1800s back to medieval times. These are people from old, noble, landowning families who normally claimed descent from medieval royalty. I treat these sources as fun curiosities rather than as factual, because these old families often manufactured their connections to royalty for the purposes of legitimizing their positions as upper-class people in the present. But if you're interested, you can find the Alcwyn C. Evans pedigree books on the National Library of Wales website. And that's my top 5 genealogy resources for doing Welsh and English research. I hope you enjoyed, and definitely let me know in the comments if I missed any record sets that you find really important.